Hi, good afternoon. So I did not have a chance to do a professional development with my staff because our staff meeting is next Tuesday, so I'm going to do a simulated presentation for you today. So thanks for coming. So I've chosen to do my presentation on the idea of tracking. The rationale for this selection of topic is my own personal experience. I teach art. I teach all levels of art at my school. That's 1, 2, 3, and 4. This year, in addition to my regular art classes, I have been assigned the sculpture class as well. What I've noticed in my art classes in general is that I get a heterogeneous mix of students. So I get freshmen, sophomore, junior, and seniors. I also get the whole spectrum of the student body and the student population. So I've got the AP kids on one side, I've got the special ed on the other side. I accept also the physically handicapped kids in my classroom. We welcome the EL kids. I've got everybody. I've been doing this for 10 years and I'm used to it and I enjoy it. What I found from the heterogeneous mix is that even the AP or the higher ability track students feel like they don't understand art, and everybody kind of starts at a zero ground level. Everybody has the same sort of fears. The great thing about this mix in my classroom is that there's a lot of peer learning opportunities. So when I have an EL student, I will look for translators and sit them next to each other. That way the kid who knows that language as a second language has an opportunity to practice. The EL student has an opportunity to make a connection and not feel so alone in the school. The great thing about my subject matter is it's so visual. So it's a lot different than maybe your normal academic classroom environment where they're used to the teacher lecturing. I don't do this all the time. I do a lot of demonstration and then I wander around and help the kids a lot. They're also free to interact with each other. They're sat at table groups with 2 per group, so they get to know their neighbors really well. I tend to seat the high ability and the lower ability kids together. That way one can take on the role of a teacher, the other one can learn from a peer, and it's a little bit less intimidating for them. The teaching student learns the subject matter on a deeper level, because in order to teach something, you need to really know it well, and you'll find that while you're teaching it, you learn things through the teaching itself. The other student also gets that extra support from students that maybe they're a little bit too shy to ask the teacher for, so it works well. However, this year in my sculpture classes, I have noticed that instead of getting that heterogeneous mix and the whole scope of student body, I'm only getting the lower end. The reason for that is that my Art 1, 2, 3, and 4 classes are all college level, college prep courses. So they're on the A through G list. The sculpture class is not. And I've talked to my administration about this because I like to have that mix of kids. And they have actually admitted that they're using sculpture as a dumping ground for those lower level kids. So I've got predominantly special ed kids, kids on IEPs, kids on 504 plans, kids that haven't been tracked into successful higher level classes historically. And what has been happening in those classes specifically are increased classroom disruptions, increased classroom management problems, and the students themselves expect less of the class. They are very vocal in their rebellion with the idea of writing and reading and presenting in my subject. They are very vocal in the fact that they don't feel like things are expected of them, and so my expectations to them are very new and disconcerting for them, and I think it would be a much more successful class if the tracking were removed. So tracking has been a very personal experience for me this year because it's brought about all of these feelings about the fact that my school is not as democratic as I had previously been hoping. So I did a little research. So background on tracking is that tracking was developed in the early 1900s, and it came about because of the influx of multicultural immigrants to the American school system. So what happened was the original idea of a democratic, educated populace kind of went by the wayside a little bit when people felt like there were too many people from other places coming in. So tracking was kind of adopted. There were different tracks. There was university-bound tracks, there were vocational tracks, and they were not the same. It's very deeply ingrained in our current educational system because it's been around for so long. And as everybody in education knows, change is not something that the education system itself generally likes to do. It seems to be very difficult. So ability tracking starts very early. It generally starts in first, second grade, and it starts that first time that the teacher notices things about the student. It's generally done by teachers. It's also done by counselors and other people at the elementary school. So that is based on some assessments. It's based on their reading level, but it's also based on emotional indicators, behavioral indicators, and too often it's very subjective. So what we found in tracking is that the minority population is overrepresented in the lower tracks. And we want to find out why that would be and what we can do about that. What has happened with tracking is that even though it's supposed to be ability placed, there really isn't very much opportunity for the kids to move themselves from one track to another track. So for example, if in second grade they were not a very strong reader and they were placed in that lower tracking group, that track would then follow them through their elementary school career, and then it just generally lends to that same sort of junior high and high school track. So those kids are sort of automatically pushed into those lower or remedial courses. Even though students have choice in which class they take in junior high and in high school, mostly in high school, they are often so aware of how they've been tracked that they internalize the tracking. So they will generally choose for themselves courses that have been sort of from the top down selected for them. So that means that students who have always been at that top level reading group, the top level track, they've been in the GATE program, etc., they tend to go towards those AP classes. They're tracked into all those honors classes, and they are seen as more successful. Whereas those kids that are on those bottom level tracks generally learn to see themselves as not as smart. And because of the way that we think about intelligence as something that you have or you don't have, something that you were born with or you weren't born with, something that is in fact static when it's not. For that reason, tracking can be very deleterious to the students. They're internalizing these labels and they find it very difficult to break out of them, which we know as educators is really what we're trying to do. So let's talk about the teachers. So the teachers of the lower track classes, of which I am actually one, are often unprepared in the subject matter. Again, just to sidetrack into my own life, I'm not a sculpture teacher. Never wanted to be a sculpture teacher. Very upfront to my administration about the fact that I do not do sculpture. I'm a painter, I'm a drawer. That's what I know. That's what I should teach because that's what I know, that's what I'm good at. However, the other sculpture teacher has been burnt out because he's been dealing with these difficult kids. What happens is the teachers of the lower track classes often come in unprepared in those subject matters. That's because they generally are going to be the newer teachers and they need to take what they can get. What they can get is often not the plum assignments. They're not given the honors kids. They're not given those higher level classes. Instead, they're given the classes with a lot of behavioral problems. They're given those classes with a lot of kids who already are less motivated to work. And what happens is they also have a lot less teaching experience. So where a tenured teacher, a teacher who's been doing this for decades or more, could generally get that class in hand, the new teacher will often flail and generally lead to the students not doing well. So here's what it leads to. A lot of new teacher turnover. We know that in California, the average for the first 5 years of teaching is the 50% drop-off rate. We're tired of losing all of our new teachers, but when we set them up for failure like this, of course that's going to happen. There is also increased class management issues. Generally, the teachers are blamed for this, when obviously if you put a group of students together who generally all individually don't do well, when you put them all together in the same class, as a group, they are not going to be doing well. What you also find is inequitable educational opportunity, and that is really at the core of the problem here. As a nation, we are supposedly a democratic people, and we generally say that we want to have an educated populace. If that is really the goal, then it needs to become our job to make sure that every kid has a choice, that kids from the different racial backgrounds, kids from the lower socioeconomic strata, should not be stuck into these classrooms where they are not given those older, more experienced teachers, where they're not being shown different management ways, different teaching strategies, and they're instead given these new teachers who stand in front of the classroom and talk, which cannot always be successful for all kids. There are proponents of the tracking system, and this is in part why tracking is still in place. Even though tracking has been proven to be harmful to a great deal of the population, especially to minorities, especially to those poorer income children, especially to the immigrant children, especially to the EL children and the special ed children, there are people who benefit. And those people who benefit tend to be the dominant culture, the white kids. It also tends to be those high ability level kids, those kids that have been identified at a very young age as kids who have it. And those kids generally have parents that are happy with the educational system. Those parents, therefore, fight detracking. They fight change because the school system is working for them. What we need to do as teachers is instead to start thinking about what's working for the upper level of kids and have that start to work for all levels of kids, because obviously we want to have high expectations for all. We want all students to have a sense of intellectual competence. So these are some solutions and some alternatives. The first of these is detracking, and detracking has been done in several places over the last decade or two. Detracking has had some successes and some failures. Like I said, there has been a lot of pushback from those parents of those higher ability tracked kids, and they don't want to see it. Heterogeneous mixing of students within every class is really what detracking is all about. That means that in your 9th grade English class, it wouldn't be 9th grade remedial English, 9th grade college prep English, and 9th grade honors English, and more recently 9th grade AP English. That would be dissolved, and instead what you'd have is 9th grade English. So the great thing about that, of course, is that we're raising expectations for all of those students. So that means that in detracking schools, they have taken away remedial courses. They have expected all of those lower level kids that have been identified as such, they've expected them to achieve at a higher level. All of those upper level kids have also the same expectations. This also means that nobody is expected to fail and nobody is set into those classes where failure is such a big option. The great thing about detracking in classrooms is that kids from all walks of life come in contact with each other. And I know that at my school, that doesn't happen anywhere other than in the electives courses. They are very much separated, so the AP kids know the AP kids because they have the same English class, the same history class, the same science classes. They take the same courses and they're living one sort of life. However, the remedial kids are all hanging out together because they know each other from those classes. Where they come together generally are places like my art class, places like the music class, places like PE. And I think it would be a great opportunity to have them come together in regular classes as well, so that they could see that there really should not be all of these distinctions between classes. Everybody should be expected to do well. Here's what you and I as teachers can do. Because as we know, top-down change is slow coming at best. So in the meantime, here's what I can do, here's what you can do. We can encourage all of our students to challenge themselves and others and have high expectations for all. This means that when you've got that kid, we all have that kid that walks in full of attitude, wearing specific clothes, and he just screams, "I'm not going to work for you." You can challenge them to challenge themselves to be more than they are, to be more than they've learned to be, so more than other people have expected them to be. And I try very hard to get to know each one of my students so that they can see that I really care for them as a human being, and that despite whatever they are putting out there in the world, I expect results from them. I expect them to do well, and I expect them to succeed. The other thing that we can do is to provide opportunities for diverse ways of learning and assessment. Not every child has been trained to do well on tests. Some kids learn differently, so we want to make sure that we're using everything that we know about different learning styles and different assessments so that we can give each kid a chance to be successful. So this past week in my class, I gave a slide presentation similar to this in my sculpture class. I had them take notes. Some of them are good at that, some of them are not. Then we did a hands-on project. After the hands-on project, I had them write about it and I had them give a presentation. Some kids are great at the note-taking, some kids are great at the project. Some kids, and they're surprising ones, are really good at the presentations. It's our job as teachers to vary what we do in our class to give kids more opportunities to have success. If they're not having a lot of success at those multiple choice tests, perhaps we as teachers need to think of a different route of assessment to see really what they know and give them that opportunity for success, perhaps in a performance assessment. We also can provide support. This can be much more casual than one might generally think. Even though a student is not necessarily performing well, you can always ask them how their day is. Take an interest in their life. Sometimes this surprises students, but more often than not, they will begin to have a rapport with you. You have a rapport with them. They sense that you care about them. And for me, I have students that work for me who don't work for other teachers because they say that they know that I care. Another way that we can provide support is by showing pride in their work. So it's easy for me. I teach art. We have a lot of work to exhibit. So sometimes I take the really great pieces and I will exhibit them in the library. It's amazing to see the kids' faces light up when they see that their work has gotten into the library, because maybe that's never happened before. I also would like to encourage accountability. Heaven knows teachers do enough. We work hard. So I encourage the kids to be accountable for their own learning. They don't have a pencil? Yeah, I have a pencil to lend them, but that's their job, so they need to be paying me back for that. If they don't have their homework, can they turn it in Monday? Well, no. They have a whole week to do their homework. They need to be accountable. If they don't understand what's happening, they need to be the ones to ask the question. We're not mind readers. It's something that hasn't generally happened for a lot of the lower track kids because those kids have been taught year after year after year that they cannot be accountable for their own learning, and there really is no point. What we need to do right now is change that and let them realize that they are actually in charge of their own education and that it's important. Another thing we can do is to keep them actively involved. Students don't like to sit there and be talked to. Who does? So instead of just talking, ask questions. I know that everything I know about technology I've learned from teenagers. Everything I know about pop culture, I've learned from teenagers. Almost everything I know about different cultures, I've learned from my students. They like to have the question and answers, and they're interested in becoming involved in other things. More important than anything else, we need to start fostering a classroom culture of mutual respect and also of inclusion. So I don't want to be a teacher that's only interested in the best of the kids. I want them all to realize that they are all important and they can all be the best. And I want them to start respecting each other even more than they already do. So that's my talk. What I'm going to do is leave up these resources in the meantime in case you would like to read more about tracking, what's good, what's bad, and why. And then I'm going to hand you a handout. So the handout is really just going to be a review of the slide presentation that I just gave. And then at the bottom of the handout, you're going to see a couple of questions. So if this was a real talk, I would give my fellow teachers a moment to jot down their own past experiences with tracking and their current experiences with tracking, both as a student and as a teacher. And then I would like to give them also an opportunity to write out their own solutions for tracking and how to deal with it. After that, I would do a think, pair, share, where at the teachers' tables, because we always do this at tables in the library, that they could share out different best practices, and then we could compile a list together as a faculty to email out to everybody. That way we can sort of start to have a little bit of a grassroots change. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. You've been a lovely audience.